G'day and welcome to Wholehearted. In this video, Robert and I are talking about the dreaded imposter syndrome. Look, it's a tough topic. It really affects most leaders and it's not an easy one to deal with. But the great news is this, there is a way to beat it once and for all. We're going to talk about that today. All right, here we go.
We'll always go back to the heart, the heart, the heart. The heart don't lie, the heart, the heart, the heart. The heart don't lie.
There are 5 key points we're going to cover today that you need to know to beat imposter syndrome once and for all. Here they are. Number 1, we're going to be talking about what imposter syndrome is, how you know if you've got it, and when does it tend to show up for us. Number 2, why is it more common today than ever before? Number 3, we're going to talk about how it can have a far greater negative impact than we usually even realize. And number 4, and finally, what do you need to know to conquer it for good? So let's get stuck in. Robert, what do people mean when they talk about imposter syndrome? What is this really?
All right. So let's start with some of the symptoms. One of the most prominent ones is the person feels like they're a phony. They may have persistent beliefs that they're not as competent as others think they are. It's like they're a bit of a fraud. And some people who are really hard on themselves will say, I'm a con man or a con woman. And there's no limits to how people can hammer themselves, especially if there's some disappointment, if they have had an initial success and then later there's a disappointment. One of the things I found out about this in my research over time, and this goes back in my career, long before they called it imposter syndrome, but yet it was still there, of course. And what I found is people are compensating for a deep feeling of shame. In other words, flawed and defective, and they're trying to stuff that down and rise above it. So how do they rise above it? Well, very courageously. They put out there this pride, and some people comes across as arrogance or superiority, which honestly, it saves their life. It gets them through. You know the old saying, fake it till you make it, right? You've heard this a million times, Andrew.
Yeah.
And so I think in a sense, it kind of gets you through, but then you secretly know underneath that you don't believe that. So in a lot of the training that I've had, someone is looking for dignity. So if they deal with the unconscious shame, they can literally transform it to dignity. So how would you describe that? Well, a feeling of being human. I believe in myself as a man or woman. I have strengths and weaknesses like everyone, like all the great leaders throughout history. We all have our flaws. And what happens is when someone can show that dignity, share it, it comes across in the personality as humility. In other words, I'm here to give you my very best. I'm not perfect, but I learned from my mistakes. So what a wonderful way to inspire others. You don't expect perfection from them. You just want their very best. And sometimes our biggest transformations, especially with a lot of leaders I know, comes from when they fall flat on their face. So I think, that cycle is really fantastic way to identify the real core symptom. What is the real cause and be able to deal with that.
Yeah, so people may not even be aware that they have that shame. It's at that unconscious level. But these are some of the things you might notice. It's that little voice in your head when you're about to stand up and present in a big meeting or a big presentation that says, I'm anxious, I'm nervous. Or it's that little voice that wonders if you might fail or miss the big deadline. Or it's that little voice that wonders if you're really as good as others seem to think that you are. Or even you get that promotion and then you think, can I handle this?
Yeah.
So we find imposter syndrome really shows up when we want to step outside our comfort zone.
Yeah.
So imposter syndrome is actually really common. This is not something to be ashamed of. There's shame underneath, and yet it's not a shameful thing. We don't want to shame ourselves for our shame. Almost all leaders have imposter syndrome during times of great success and disappointment. Even Einstein, one of the greatest minds in recent history, admitted to feeling like an imposter. Shortly before his death in 1955, he said, "The exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me feel very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler." Isn't that amazing? I
He
feel
did have
like
a lot of humility.
he did. He did.
Yeah.
If Einstein can
Amazing
feel
guy.
like an imposter, I reckon anyone
Yeah.
can.
He changed the world with his inner research, you might say, because he spent a lot of his time alone. And he did amazing things, and then he wondered, am I the real deal, even toward the end of his life? Yeah, what an amazing guy.
He
Another
did.
guy to mention is Winston Churchill. He bombed over and over again. He was plagued with addictions, but then he became the leader. He rose above his feelings of inferiority in a time of crisis. And I think great leaders do that. You have to just do it anyway. Find a way to rise above. But then in between, those types of leaders, men and women, tend to crash and burn. And so this is where they need help. This is why leaders need support and coaching and guidance, no matter what level they're at.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the reasons intelligent people feel like an imposter is the more we learn about, the more we become aware of that we actually don't know. So if you feel like an imposter, I reckon take it as a compliment. It means you're pretty switched on and you're in good company.
Yeah.
And it's only getting more and more common.
It is. And centuries ago, Meister Eckhart said, learn to be a beginner every day. And that was his formula for keeping us humble, because we could always do it better. And so many people have done that, and so many people just feel, well, I can't do it better, and now they're going to find out I'm a fraud. So, one of the things I'd like to share is this amazing woman I work with back in San Diego some years ago, and she had a huge ambition. I had just moved there. She was referred to me by a client, and she was flat down on the mud with imposter syndrome in a deep crisis. But what had happened, she grew up in a family where her dad owned a huge law firm. And she, of course, wanted daddy's approval. So she went and got a master's degree in marketing. She was hired by a corporation in San Diego by a woman who believed in her and guided her up the corporate ladder at the speed of light. And she was very excited about her career. The company treated her really well, and she was well respected. She was not even 30 in the senior position. And then her boss, the lady who hired her, got transferred interstate and was replaced by an old-fashioned gentleman who was near retirement age, who thought women belong home in the kitchen. And so he invalidated her. And it triggered huge things, and she just couldn't take it anymore. But she didn't know why she was so triggered by him. She's not the cause of his chauvinism, right? Or misogyny, or whatever you want to call it. She went to another company, same thing, hired by a man who was more senior in the company, and he would invalidate her and wouldn't really respect her for her contributions to the company, because she was very skilled. So then she felt depressed. She quit the job and she went on antidepressants. She put on weight, and that's when I met her. And I wanted to talk to her immediately about wrong conclusions. And I realized that it was all about dad. Sounds simple, right? But actually true. Her father was a chauvinist. He thought women belong in the kitchen, the old-fashioned women barefoot and pregnant. He invalidated her mother all the time. He loved her. He was devoted to her, but he just felt women were inferior. So she's looking to get dad's approval, even though he knows that dad doesn't respect women as much. And so this became the challenge that we had. At 5 years old, she decided she wasn't worthy of really competing in a man's world. And we had to work through that shame. And she transformed it. Wow. She got hired in a small company to take over all the marketing, all the sales, by a male. She fell in love with the owner. They got married and had 2 kids. And so, she was forever grateful sending me letters and updates and all that about how the business has exploded. And she's a working mother, and so became a very modern woman at that time. So it was quite exciting to watch her. And really, it was assisting her and putting her finger on the real cause, which was dad shaming women. And she turned it and found her dignity, and her life exploded. Got off all the meds, and she was back running on the beach down in beautiful San Diego.
Amazing. What a great story. I think it's worth unpacking, why is imposter syndrome getting more and more common in the modern age? And firstly, we've got to look at the pace of change. So this just keeps accelerating. There's new technology, there's new ways of looking at things, there's new ways of working together. It's impossible to be across all of it and the complexity that brings, and to keep up with that. So it means that leaders can no longer be that person that knows it all. And we're often tempted to feel that sense of inadequacy. I don't know enough. I need to keep learning new skills and take another course, more certificates. And when I do that, then maybe I'll feel okay.
Yeah.
And that's a wrong conclusion in itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then we've also got the types of business disruption we're experiencing, including crisis, like we have been for the last few years. And it just borders on chaotic. And it means that we're placed in these extra challenging leadership scenarios. We're frequently pushed outside our comfort zone. And we know that that's when the imposter syndrome comes knocking.
It's even kicked into expert syndrome. And underneath it is imposter. But people who have limited experience now know everything. And they feel they have to claim that. And it becomes very much a facade, very much a mask of, I know everything. But underneath, it's the imposter syndrome. Just another name for it. Yeah.
We'll unpack what we can do about that later and how we can identify that. So why does this happen, Robert? Why does this really happen? What's going on underneath?
Well, in addition to the wrong conclusions, I think a lot of leaders, great leaders, came out of a family of chaos. And there was criticism. One parent criticizing the other. And it might be, if you did something really, really good, your parents were over the moon, proud, excited. You're the best son, daughter I could ever have. And then if something went wrong, like it could even be the next day. Oh my God, I wish I never had you. So I call them chaotic families. And so what happens, sometimes this person who feels so ashamed one day and excited the next can't win. And so they feel chaotic. And what do? They rise above the chaos. They become visionary leaders. This is often in their past. And so if you can help people balance that out, that, someday we have good days and bad days, but you don't want to go on that polarity. You want to get the right support to help you deal with this idea that every criticism makes you feel like giving up, makes you feel like you're not enough. And you're secretly hiding it because you're the business owner, you're the CEO or a high-level executive, and you're secretly hiding this underneath. And so what happens is, I think a lot of people who want to lead have a history of betrayal. So it doesn't mean they can't lead. It means they need to deal with the part of them that feels like a fraud, like an imposter. And then they can balance that. Then they feel more stable. One of the other things I notice is extreme perfectionism. It's unbelievable, Andrew. It's like, no matter what you do, it's not good enough. And you beat yourself up. So even though you might run a meeting really well, if there's one feedback that's critical, you have a miserable day. And if you launch a new program and the launch goes well, but you think it should have been better, or launching a new product, it's like you're at home at night beating yourself up. You can't sleep. This is what I hear all the time. And now we have in leadership, we have a lot of politics involved, and it's worldwide, it's everywhere, and it creates more stress because you're trying to keep what's politically trending, those people happy, and at the same time, get the right people in place to do the job properly. So there's a lot of inner conflict around that in this modern world. And this is why I think what we're seeing, what's trending, is imposter syndrome going through the ceiling. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And what I find with clients of mine is that they're not always aware that they have this unconsciously, and they have this source in their past where it's conditioned at an early age. So sometimes I get clients telling me, oh, it's pretty mild. I can handle it. It's not a problem. And it's worth unpacking how insidious the imposter syndrome really is. Even if it seems mild in your life, in your career, I want you to imagine you're about to give an important presentation and your stomach is doing backflips, or perhaps it's just a few little butterflies. Imagine you get the promotion you've been working for so hard, and part of you knows you deserve it, and yet there's part of you that feels like you're overwhelmed and out of your depth. And how am I going to handle all of this? It's these sorts of negative feelings and thoughts that really undermine your faith in you. And it affects all your interactions and decisions at that unconscious level. It distracts you. It saps your energy. And in life, we so often get not what we need, but what we expect. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I also see in the world of coaching and mentoring, sort of mindset things, and where people are trying to fix that broken mind instead of getting to the cause, which is unconscious. I think you're really good at that. I've seen you do it over and over again, leading meetings and facilitating workshops, that you just guide people back where they can find that cause deep inside of them. I think this is really the way forward for leaders, is to, you can't fix a broken mind. You can't mindset your way out of it. And of course that's trending. So everybody, wants to take the trainings. Not that the trainings don't have value, is that they don't, the deeper core issues, like the one we're discussing, imposter, they go back to your childhood, to those wrong conclusions that we talked about. One gentleman I worked with in Los Angeles some time ago was a Hollywood celebrity. And it's better not to mention his name for privacy, but he was a big star, and he was referred to me by his body worker. And his wife told me he made $2 million a year on average, had a number of Oscar nominations, and it just, like, the career was too good to be true. But he secretly was hiding imposter syndrome. He decided to produce his own movie and star in it. It bombed. It lost money in the box office. It just didn't have the script that was required to keep the momentum of his extraordinary career. And then imposter syndrome kicked in a big way. He went into a deep depression. So he took a lesser part in, not a big budget movie, and that movie bombed the following year. And he became devastated. So he was referred to me for coaching. And what happened was, it's the same thing, is that he felt his dad was a fraud. He loved his dad, and he felt his dad was an imposter, a con man. He secretly thought, everyone says I'm just like my dad, so I must be an imposter too. And so this is, deeply unconscious, because this is, he's not an old man, but he's mature enough to take these leading roles in these extraordinary movies. And wow, it took a while to get him to turn it around, but he did turn it around. It was very exciting. So I think it doesn't matter, if you're a big name, a CEO of a large corporation, or in this case, an exaggerated example is like celebrity person. There's a long way to fall. And if you crash and burn, wow, it's hard to get back on your feet again. So their life, it looks so perfect, in a movie, but it's not that easy, because there's constant pressure to keep repeating the same great performance.
That's a great example of that expectation effect as well. So our third point for today, our third take-home point, is that the subtle expectation effect means that imposter syndrome has a far bigger impact than most people even realize. So for example, I had a client, Sasha, who was leading a significant digital transformation agenda. She was a brilliant woman, but she was suffering from imposter syndrome, and it was really holding her back. Her go-to strategy to manage her boss's perceptions of her was to undersell herself, be self-deprecating, and set others' expectations of her quite low. And then she'd push herself hard to over-deliver so that they were unexpectedly impressed. And she didn't realize that this was her strategy. This was subconscious. So for example, she'd say to her boss, oh, I'm not sure I did the right thing, but we got there. Or I'm sure I'm just faking it till I make it. So very, very humble. To her, that's what it was. And as I say, she wasn't doing it on purpose. She said she couldn't help do it. It was a habit. It was automatic for her, and it ran on autopilot. And when I raised it with her as a concern, she actually defended it. She said, look, this is me being humble. She felt that honesty that she was showing was how that she was actually connecting with her boss and forming a bond there. And she knew that this self-deprecation wasn't accurate, and she was doing a great job given the circumstances, but she really seemed to be fishing for that reassurance from her boss. And sometimes the boss would reassure her, which felt good, and other times the boss was silent, and she found that very unnerving.
Yeah.
So I encouraged her to get 360-degree feedback, which means go out and ask everyone around you for anonymous feedback about how you're doing. And sure enough, the feedback was that she was perceived as lacking confidence and potentially not as competent as she needed to be, which just wasn't true at all. I'd seen her in action. She was brilliant. She was amazing at what she did. But there were these signals that she was giving out to people based on the uncertainty she felt about herself. And luckily, after we processed this and she was able to let it go, she was able to provide herself with that validation that she was seeking, and others' perceptions of her changed as a result. So this is that subtle expectation effect. Ultimately, how we see ourselves seeds how others are going to see us, and then they treat us accordingly.
Good for her. Wow, that's a beautiful journey to help her transform that. This is why, Andrew, we call our business Wholehearted, because when we're in the whole heart, we can accept our humanity, and we don't need that constant validation from others, whether it's our boss, our team, or other colleagues, because sometimes you'll get it and sometimes you won't. If you're attached to it, then your life's a roller coaster, and you can't really enjoy the good days because you're worried about, what's going to happen tomorrow or the next meeting or the next launch. So I think it's very exciting that we're dealing with this to transform that shame into dignity as a man or woman, and to be able to drop that pride, or, I have to fake it till I make it, and just drop into humanity. That wholehearted humanity it shows the humility that we all need to be able to share ourselves and inspire others to the max. And I think this is where the future of leadership, in a world that's shaky from top to bottom, we need wholeheartedness. And I think that example of that young lady is just beautiful, how she could claim her life back.
Couldn't agree more. So we know this isn't happening at that conscious level. It's actually an unconscious programming from earlier on in our life. There's so many amazing things we can do on autopilot. Once we learn them and really embed them, we become so skilled. Driving a car, riding a bike, we can do these things without even thinking about it. So I want to ask you, Robert, what can we do about this? If it's at that unconscious level, what can we do to shift imposter syndrome?
Well, there are tools that people could learn to use it by themselves, just to balance things out before a big meeting. And, as you know, one of the things that's so effective is voice dialogue therapy. Of course, you need someone to train you to do it right. But once you're trained, you could do it. The amazing couple, Hal and Sidra Stone, created this many years ago. And, I've been using it for decades with great success, not only to teach a client that I'm coaching, but also to teach them how to do it for themselves. It is absolutely brilliant. Another thing that I like is I also trained with the late Roger Callahan on EFT. In those days, it was called Callahan techniques, but it's spread around the world as emotional freedom technique. Some people refer to it as tapping. It's another great brand, but it was actually Roger who created it. And it's a way to balance your system, your nervous system, and get it from sympathetic to the parasympathetic, so you can relax and breathe easier and tap into that wholeheartedness. And you go in there with your own passion, your own self-respect, your dignity, and your whole heart. That's what I love about it. And I've used it myself for big presentations where I was just so nervous. I expected to be talking to 50 to 75 people. And then all of a sudden I was surprised. It turned out to be 300 people for reasons no one knew. And then wow, was I nervous. But I took a time out before I was invited up. I did the EFT, and I just came right back to the present moment in my heart. I gave the same talk that I'd prepared so well, and it was not the least bit nervous. So I think these are tools. They're wonderful tools. But then, of course, our deeper work that we use in Wholehearted is the character analysis. And it's so brilliant because we can both do an analysis and then diagnose the way forward based on the strengths of someone who has ridiculously high perfectionism, you know, and people who have some of this toxic shame that they're covering up because they didn't grow up with that dignity as a woman or as a man. Then I think if people want to look at it from an unconscious spiritual point of view, how can you detach from the past? So, and how can you detach from worry about the future so you can just focus on this moment and seize this moment, this meeting, this launch, and inspire everybody because you're so in present time. Your whole life force is here and no other place. You're not looking at your phone. You're not nervous, and you're not distracted. And you just talk to people, get the feedback, get the support, and return feedback and support. That's what great leaders do. But you have to be fully in the moment. And so many people in leadership roles are not. They're there, but they're not there because they're worried about this, that, or the other thing. And often it's like, am I going to screw up again? Even though they're probably brilliant with a great track record. And then, of course, the shadow. And, it was initially created in the unconscious by the great Carl Jung. But what we have done in our Wholehearted work is to synthesize all of this: voice dialogue, EFT, character analysis, and diagnosis, learning to spiritually detach from the past and the future and focus on this moment. And then, of course, embrace that shadow, because as Jung said, it's the doorway to creativity and the future. So I think these are tools that people can use. And, you need to be taught it. You need to be coached, mentored into it. You can't just read a book and do it. But I think the way we've put it together can save people years of research to be able to know about how do you implement this into your life? How do you get this kind of help in the shortest amount of time with the greatest result? And so to me, that's really the brand we created, Wholehearted. And, it's very exciting to work with leaders on this because the shift is so miraculous. Yeah.
So there's some fantastic tools there, Robert. Thank you for sharing. We're going to release videos around all of this in more depth coming up over time.
Yes.
And to summarize, so we know it's not at our conscious level, it's in the unconscious, which means the first step is really self-reflection and awareness, getting more aware of where the imposter syndrome shows up for you and how it's actually impacting you, possibly more than you realize. And once you do that, you can start drawing those threads through to the root cause. Robert talked about some tools you can use in the moment, which are fantastic. I love those, especially Roger Callahan's tapping or EFT.
Yeah,
And
beautiful.
we'll do some videos around that as we go over time as well. And then the deeper process work, really, really powerful. So we'll be talking about that more in future as well.
Yeah,
another really practical thing you can do if you're interested to sort out imposter syndrome for yourself is to check out our new Wholehearted Confidence program. And it's all about overcoming imposter syndrome. So follow a link in the description below and head over to the Wholehearted Academy to use the exclusive code that we've left for you there for our YouTube viewers. And also hit subscribe and the notification bell if you want to see some of those more in-depth videos about some of the techniques that we talked about. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay wholehearted, and we'll catch you next time.
See you next time.
We'll always come back to the heart.